Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Rosie. I am a third-year student in International Relations and Development, as well as Events Manager for the Development Society at the University of Sussex. The Development Society is involved with matters of development and regularly hosts events such as talks, workshops, and book clubs. So together with Louise, we put together this online event with two members of the Brighton and Hove Fair Trade group. So here's how the event is going to take place. First, Louise is going to tell us a little bit more about the event's topic and today's speakers. Then we're going to engage in a discussion with the two speakers on the importance of ethical and sustainable production and consumption. And finally, there's going to be an open Q&A session, so feel free to post your questions for the speakers at any point in the chat. I would like to remind you that by signing up to this event, you are agreeing to the Students' Union Zero Tolerance policy. So thank you again, and now I would like to give the floor to Louise.
Hi everyone, thank you again for coming. I hope you're all well. My name is Louise. I am a third-year student studying international development with Italian, and I am also a volunteer for the Fairtrade Brighton Hove group. So quickly to give a brief on what the Fairtrade mission is and how Brighton Hove is involved. The aim of Fairtrade is to connect disadvantaged farmers and workers with consumers to promote a fair and transparent trading conditions and to empower them to combat poverty. Fairtrade has a holistic approach and so also addresses other key issues such as climate change and gender equality. And Brighton Hove is a fair trade city, which means it has a huge range of local shops and businesses which actively support fair trade producers all around the world. And some of you might already know these, for example, Hisby, Infinity Foods, as well as many other coffee shops that sell fair trade coffee.
Now, I would like to say a big thank you to Louise and Christine for participating today. Louise is a self-employed textile artist and a voluntary representative for Traidcraft and Tearcraft, which are UK-based fair trade companies. She has been involved with fair trade since she was a teenager and has supplied various churches around the UK with fair trade products.
And Christine is a supply chain specialist. She has experience in UN bodies, social enterprises, and the Body Shop. She is currently working as a World Fair Trade Organization expert for Made 51, which is a 100% refugee-made brand. And she is also a global community director for Fashion Revolution, which we will get to later on. We will now jump to Christine and Louise if you would like to add anything about your involvement with fair trade.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got to be here today. So I was a very active kid, jumping around doing lots of things, and I was born on a farm, lived on a farm, and I went through school a year early because my parents, I think, thought they wanted to get me out of the house. And but at about the age of 12, I started failing. And I think today I would probably be called an ADHD dyslexic, but in those days I didn't really have labels. And so I failed on my GCSEs, but I stayed on for A-levels because they thought, what else are you going to do? Stayed on for my A-levels, and all to surprises of everybody, I passed them all. So, you know, just if you think you're failing, just remember that. And I passed them all, much to the surprise of anyone, but my career path by then had been told go down the route of doing something practical. So I went off to learn furniture in college, and I ended up with a design degree in three-dimensional design from Bristol. At the end of the year, at the end of the time I came out as the top student of the year, I had designed products which obviously had to be made overseas because they had an element of handwork in them. And I didn't want them to be made in a sweatshop, but I didn't really know any more about it than that. So I went to Traidcraft, which Louise is going to tell you more about in a minute. And they said, to take these products and here's plane ticket, here's off you go. And you'll end up I ended up in India and Sri Lanka in the days where there were faxes and telex machines, and looking around and having the products made. They were manufactured and went into the Traidcraft catalogue all those years ago. And that was how I started in fair trade. And as we said, since then, I've worked in various areas. So I've worked for UN bodies, I've worked for charities like Save the Children, but most of my working career has been with fair trade enterprises, enterprises that put people and planet above growth and profit. And yeah, so that's kind of a whistle-stop tour through how I got to be here today. Yes, and just to add that another role I have is volunteering on the Brighton and Hove steering group. So I'd just like to say that, you know, we really appreciate you doing this for us today. It's fantastic.
So Louise, if you could share my slides.
Yes.
So I'm a textile artist, as said, and I trained in Winchester, at Winchester School of Art, as a weaver and knitter, and then I discovered quilts halfway through it, and so I'm now an art quilter, and I do a lot of textile sculpture and things like that. Louise, so I just thought it was appropriate to say 2 strands of my life, because the fair trade justice and all the voluntary stuff I do sort of interlinks very much in my mind with all the sort of questions I have when I'm doing my art and thinking about things. This is a general picture from one of my talks that I give to quilting and embroidery groups, and it's about this is just an overview of the embroidery and the fabric 3-dimensional stuff and the quilts that I do. The next slide. So this is more the real me, the real heart of the artist me, where I'm working a lot with mathematical ideas and trying to make maths accessible to other people through visual means. Years of teaching patchwork and quilting and women saying they can't do it has made me really passionate about trying to make things visual for people to understand and things like that. So yeah, the next one.
So I think the next slide leads into the question of how you have observed the evolution of fair trade since you have been involved since you're a teenager.
Yes, so this is what fair trade principles are now, but over the years, obviously, they've developed from very early starts. And I just put this in because this represents what everything fair trade stands for. And most people have seen this. Go on to the next one. So my story is I grew up in Wirksworth in Derbyshire, which is like a mini Brighton, but enclosed by land. And there were lots of very politically motivated and faith motivated people there who were concerned about injustice around the world. And I was in a youth group where the couple were early supporters of Tearfund, which was probably the first organisation here other than Oxfam to really sort of start thinking about things like that. And Traidcraft came out of that. So I went off to college, and and while I was away, they set up a Christmas shop, and that went really well. So they actually set it up as a full-time shop happened to be in one of my school friends' mum's house, and that went really well, and has become a permanent shop now called Trade Links. It's in Wirksworth in Derbyshire. And I just saw from reading the catalogues, I absolutely loved the early catalogues that came through from Tearfund. All the stuff that was in it really related to that, and I really understood the stories, and I just knew that it was an issue I just couldn't ignore, you know, and that things have to be just and fair. And I've always been avid recycler, and so the whole environmental stuff, my husband's job is to get people to engage with environmental and faith issues and things like that, and so it all ties together for me now. Next. So Traidcraft was set up in the late 70s, and this is just a list of the things that it was set up to do, really. And at the time, it was a really revolutionary model. I have got a longer version of this PowerPoint, which you're very welcome to ask for at the end. It will be sent to you.
We will send the full version of the PowerPoints by email to everyone. And
so I've done the timeline like this, but with other pictures in and things like that. So we just put 1 or 2 of those in. So Traidcraft first started doing food in 1980, one. And I didn't know about Traidcraft at that point, but by the time I got back home, I knew about Traidcraft because of the permanent shop that was there. Next one. And then right at the end of my PowerPoint, I put this in because these are books that I have read, or my husband recommends the Donut Economics, which is all about circular economy, which is vitally important for environmental and fair trade issues. And I've read the Coffins, Cats and Fair Trade one, and I've yet to read the Joe Osman one, which I'm really looking forward to. And no logo. I read that obviously 20 years after it was written. And I knew a lot of stuff about it because I did do fashion with textiles as well, and I keep an eye on that sort of thing, although I don't partake in the modern fashion industry because I don't like the way it is. I prefer to shop at charity shops and buy one-off pieces that I can. And but they all link together because one is talking about brands and marketing and how bad the capitalist way is, in a way, the wasteful element of it. And then Traidcraft is a completely different model. And then the other two are sort of wrapped around that as well. So if you have time, they're well worth reading. That's it.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for this introduction. And now moving on to the specific role of producers in fair trade. Christine, with your work with the World Fair Trade Organization, you often talk about the importance of storytelling when it comes to promoting artisanal producers. Could you tell us more about the value of giving a voice to producers? I think you're on mute. It should be working now.
Okay. Okay, I'm fine. Good. Right. Okay. So the voice of the producer is one of the most important things that fair trade brings to the table. I think today, I don't know if any of you are following the tragedy of what's going on in Myanmar. There's been legislation put out today banning all the organizations in Myanmar that Myanmar does not recognize. And actually, fair trade, not surprisingly, is not massively established in Myanmar, but all the trade union groups and organizations organizing people collectively to have a voice have all been banned, because these groups, these collective areas are where people can have a voice, where people can change. So it's really essential. So within fair trade, we recognise the freedom of association and equality and the right to choose. These are standard part of the fair trade standard. And where there's legislation banning unions, which there are in some countries, the WFTO standard specifically says that has to be independent and free association and bargaining for workers. So there has to be the producer's voice. If you go to the activities which are going on at the moment, all around International Women's Day, you can see online how women's voices are being articulated through fair trade. And by connecting with people, you realise that this world is so much smaller than it was. So in the 19th century, we had reformers like, he was in the 18th century, like Jeremy Bentham, but the great Quakers like the Cadburys, the Frys and the Rowntrees, who realized that you cannot make money sitting in your factory while the people down the road were being exploited and living in unacceptable conditions. And actually, the world is so small now that it's the same. We need to have acceptable positions for everybody all over the world. I was in Bangladesh when the World Food Programme was looking at the concept of putting food supplements into the out to women garment makers, because they were not receiving enough food for themselves and they were having to supplement, they were considering supplementing them. What we need to do is get that producer's voice raised so that we know as we go to bed and wear our clothes that in fact they should be paid a decent wage for the work that they do. That's why the producer's voice is so important. And yeah, and just I think it's a really important element that we bring to fair trade.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And bringing it back to today, through our own research, we have seen that COVID has had many adverse effects on fair trade farmers and workers. But on the other hand, we have also seen fair trade producers, businesses, and faith organizations be very innovative. So in your own work, how have you both seen a positive shift within these communities?
Yeah, I mean, COVID has, we think it's been bad. We're sitting desperately waiting for the end of lockdown. But actually, when you look at the $1.5 billion of orders that have been cancelled in Bangladesh alone, the thousands of factories that have received cancelled orders, these are orders they've already invested in. It's the comparison is very, we're suffering very little in comparison. So COVID has really seriously hit production all over the world. So yeah, I think there has been innovation come out of this, and hopefully that we are able to build fairer and more just systems as a result of COVID. And COVID has maybe brought forward some of the changes that needed to happen. For example, I probably have in my working life taken more aeroplanes than I probably needed to with the technology that is in place now. And the technology with COVID, I've been forced to use the technology every time rather than using the airplanes. But in terms of pivoting, there's been a lot of people have gone online, and a lot of people have more time to think about their shopping. So people have been spending longer thinking about what they buy. And as a consequence, there's been a really good level of support to online shopping of ethical, sustainable, environmental and fair trade products, which is a very, very positive part of the whole pandemic disaster. So I think what we need to do as a movement now is to build on that and to make sure that we don't do a U-turn and we actually continue to think about the consequences of the products we buy, how we buy them, and to benefit the sustainability of both people and planet, because the two are interlinked and they cannot deal with one without the other.
Do you want me to say something on this? Okay, yeah, I want. Right at the beginning of the COVID, when it was announced, I was quite worried about Traidcraft and how it was going to cope, because it's had a couple of crises over the years, like when Brexit happened and things like that, and the money all just went chaotic because of the rates and things like that, and so it's been really exciting seeing how so many people have turned to Traidcraft as just one of the companies, like Christine says, and they've done really well in being able to supply people, because they've been outside of the supermarket system and things like that, and they've been able to supply people directly without people needing to leave their houses and things like that. And they had rice and toilet tissue at the time when it was all not there in the shops and things like that. But the other thing that I love about Traidcraft is that it talks a lot about the stories behind the products, and the catalogue has got more and more stories and stuff about the ethics behind why we're buying and why we do this stuff. And so if you can get hold of or look online at the catalogue, there is just so many stories and so much information out there, and it just makes you feel like you're actually engaging with real people rather than just buying an anonymous good thing in the supermarket, and you don't know how it's been made, how exploitative it is, you don't know any of the backstory, even where it's come from a lot of the time.
Yes, thank you. And as everyone is probably aware, at present there is, how we've mentioned, there is increasingly more discussion and concern around the unsustainability of fast fashion. As Global Community Director for Fashion Revolution, what is your opinion on this, Christine? Maybe you could start by telling our audience what Fashion Revolution is about.
Okay, great. Yes. So Fashion Revolution is a campaign, a movement to change the way we look at fashion, the way we engage with fashion for a more sustainable world. And we want to encourage people to look at fashion from cradle to grave in terms of where we buy it from, how we buy it, how we use it, how we dispose of it, how we share it, how we pay for it. And at the same time, and what I love about Fashion Revolution, it's not a hair shirt campaign. We really believe in creativity. We believe in supporting young, innovative and beautiful clothing creation. So it's really about advising people how to do things better, but we're not about boycotting or standing up saying no to to anything, and that includes fast fashion. And we always get criticised for this, but I think it's very, very difficult when we are talking about these supply chains to know the truth. I don't know if some of you read about in The Guardian the tragic case of a woman who was raped and murdered by her supervisor in Tirupur. Tirupur is the 90% of all t-shirts in India are made in Tirupur. I've been there. It's just cotton city, basically. Everything's there. Probably most of the mainstream brands were working in that factory, but it's only one or two brands that get named. And I think we have to be very careful about that, because all of the companies are all working in all the same way, and all of them need to change. And there needs to be more transparency. And the Fashion Transparency Index is a measure of the top 250 companies on their transparency, not on how their performance is, but on their transparency. And we need to have more transparency and honesty in our supply chains so that we really are able to address, so consumers know more about actually how to make the right decisions about fast fashion and all fashion. And that doesn't just mean buying less fashion, it also means loving your clothes. We've just had our founder Ursula de Castro has produced a book called Love Clothes Last, which is all over. It's an amazing bestseller at the moment about how to mend and look after your clothes. So it's about having a fully sustainable aspect in terms of what we do with our clothing. And I think we have to be careful about blaming fast fashion, because at the same time we do not want people to turn around and lose their jobs overnight. What we want is a sustainable and progressive change to more sustainable and appropriate jobs for people in the fashion industry, so that those people who are dependent on their work in those countries are able to migrate their employment to a more sustainable and long-term employment, rather than boycotting overnight. So please, do think carefully about the products and clothing that you wear. There are better and more exciting clothes as options now within Fairtrade, which is exciting. And we're really, we encourage you to give your feedback to those companies that are producing Fairtrade, so that they can actually learn and grow and supply the needs of the rising generation of consumers we all need clothing. Yeah.
Would you like to add anything, Louise?
I think you're on mute, Louise.
Well, my husband was doing something in the kitchen. I put it off. I'll keep it on because yeah, I agree with everything that Christine says. And although I didn't go into fashion, I thought I was going to be a fashion designer. I ended up doing textiles. I'm very passionate about how important it is for people to understand how things are made and the value that's put on things and the working conditions and things like that. So all of these things that we've been developing ways of trying to monitor this, that we've started, but we've still got a very long way to go. And until the general public knows about these issues and starts to think before they buy, we're not going to make progress. So we've got to keep telling people, you know, this is how it's done and this is why you should think about things before you buy them.
Thank you for a good answer. And now adding on to that, Christine, could you please explain a little bit about your work around sustainable supply chains within social enterprises, Maybe you could start by defining a social enterprise for those of us who don't know.
Yeah, so a social enterprise and what we sometimes call a fair trade enterprise are those organizations that put people and planet above growth and profit, and have people at the heart of they're what we call mission-driven organizations. I don't know if you've watched the film Corporation, about how an ordinary company is driven by profit, and in Corporation compares the corporation to a psychopath, but this is not the model of a social enterprise. A social enterprise is driven by its supply chain, everyone from its customer to its producer, or its producer to its customer, and in order to deliver fair and sustainable supply chain. And it's a very challenging, very challenging area. A lot of social enterprises not only put people above the growth, but they also reach out to engage with vulnerable or marginalized suppliers, and hence, for example, with Made 51 working with refugees, integrating refugees into sustainable supply chains. So social enterprises have been really core to changing things. So if we have a look at the model of fair trade here in the UK, we have the Fairtrade label, which is monitored here in the UK by the Fairtrade Foundation and internationally by Fairtrade International. And we have the World Fair Trade Organization, who actually look at the entire organization. So the Fairtrade label can be applied to a product that's in a supermarket, but the World Fair Trade Organization is an organizational label that cannot be applied to an organization that doesn't is not mission driven. So a supermarket, most supermarkets couldn't apply for and successfully get it. I mean, someone like Hisby or Infinity Model would be able to, because they are sharing their benefits and profits with some level of integrity within the organization. So, and the history of this is that the fair trade enterprises and the social enterprises have very often been the thorns in the side, the drivers to make change. So, for example, the CLAC is the network of coffee makers, well, fair trade enterprises in Latin America, and they would want to have a higher price for their products. So they will go to their mainstream suppliers and say, look, you know, we want to have a higher price for our product. And they'll say no. But then you go to the social enterprises, the fair trade enterprises, such as Traidcraft, and its equivalents across Europe, GAPA, EZA, and so on in Europe. And they agree to put up the price. So you can then go back to the supermarkets and say, look, you know, this is possible. It's just being sustained in the market in Europe here. You need to put that price up. And with that pressure from the social enterprises are able to leverage increased prices for the producers. So there's this opportunity. It's for challenging the system with using social enterprises and fair trade enterprises as they go deeper. I mean, great examples here in the UK is that, for example, Divine Chocolate. Divine Chocolate has producer ownership. When you buy a bar of Divine Chocolate against a bar of chocolate from a supermarket home brand with fair trade label, the depth of that integration of the producers into that supply chain and ownership within that supply chain is massively different. If you go to Infinity and you see a product by Equal Exchange, you'll see the depth of support by that enterprise to that supply chain is significantly larger and longer than those of the normal supermarket. So there's a challenge the system and able to look at alternatives.
Well, that gives great hope. And now bringing it back home in Brighton, we see a lot of local businesses selling unique clothes and jewelry from developing countries. How do you think these unique sustainable pieces present a good alternative to current unsustainable modes of production and consumption?
I think they're great. I think we should support local businesses. In my household, we have a very unusual situation in that my husband will not buy anything from a supermarket, and I won't buy any piece of clothing that's not from pre-loved, or you're buying it from the buyer themselves or fair trade. So we're fairly unique, and I think we need to be more conscious about how we buy things and what we buy. And local is absolutely one of the best answers. But at the same time, we have to think about what local means. You know, this is a cotton scarf, but there's no cotton grown in the UK. We live in a global world with global commodities, and we have to integrate our desire to support the local with our desire to realise that the supply chain is local these days as well. So we need a more differentiation. We need to have more of collaboration between artisanal producers so that they can gain some of the access to the supply to the market, which is so strongly controlled by the high street. And that needs to be challenged by collaboration and working together, and so that we can enable that to happen. And I think Brighton is a great example of that, because looking at, for example, Brighton having premises which are rented at by the council themselves to encourage sustainable businesses. And I think we could do more. We could do more to support local and unique products, and reuse pre-loved to our market. But don't forget that as we drink our coffee is always going to come from another country. Our cotton always comes from another country, and actually we shouldn't look at local only and forsake the international. We are all matrixed together into one global world, and we need to be thinking about everybody equally at the same time.
So that's really true. And one of the things I noticed, well, one of the things we experienced right at the beginning of lockdown was that we get our milk from the milkman because we want to use glass bottles, not plastic ones, and we buy a few other bits from them. And we've done that for years. And then we get a organic veg box from Barkham nurseries, which they bring, Zedify bring, and they use electric bikes to bring it, or sometimes they are on proper push bikes. And so Alex, who's the cook in the house, was thinking that we'd be fine because we got these other supplies that we get regularly that didn't rely on the supermarkets, and we choose to pay a bit more in order to have the organic and the glass rather than the plastic and all that sort of thing. And what happened was we doubled in house size because our children had to come home from university, our younger two. And suddenly everybody else had decided they were going to use these other companies, and we couldn't up our food needs. It was really scary because, you know, I wasn't allowed to go out of the house because I'm on the list. And it just, there were a few weeks when it was really scary because suddenly what we have been doing all the time, trying to live as ethically, as sustainably as possible, suddenly became unavailable. And on one side of thinking, great, all these people are coming on board and getting the message and things like that. I just really hope that they stay on board with all of those things, because I had like a flurry of orders for fair trade stuff from neighbours, and then none of them are biting. None of them are buying anything now because the supermarkets are up and running. They don't see the need, and that's no good if you're trying to build, you know, an ethical way of consuming stuff into the system. You've got to have consistency from customers.
Thank you so much. So before we move on to our Q&A session, our last question is for the students out there. What advice would you both give to students of any academic background who are interested in pursuing a career in fair trade, or who would like to continue a discussion around fair trade?
My first reaction to that is please do it, because we really, really need your support, and we need some young blood in fair trade. We really need your young minds and your technical skills and your really appropriate global thinking. And we need you. So I think it's amazing. Almost any skill that you have is transferable to fair trade, because fair trade is just trade. It's just trade, but we're trying to attempt to make it fairer. And so all the skills that would be needed in a conventional supply chain, and I actually think supply chain should be taught in school. I think we should all really understand how much is going to the taxman compared to how much is going to the refugee artisan in a convention, in a fair trade supply chain. And I think Traidcraft is doing a great initiative around that in terms of transparency. But until we really understand the difference between a fair supply chain and charity, it's always going to be confusion there. But so yes, all those skills are transferable. So if you're going to be an accountant or a copywriter or work in tech or work in development, or even if you're a chef, you know, can work with fantastic fair trade ingredients. We've got this wonderful bake-off we'd like you all to be part of. You can transfer those skills into sustainable fair trade supply chains. I mean, if you love coffee, you can work with fair trade coffee. You know, there's so many ways that you can work with coffee, with fair trade, which is the same skills that you are in the conventional supply chain. So I would just ask you to go ahead and also get experience in the conventional supply chain. I had the 7 years working in the body shop. I think it's absolutely essential to understanding the demands of conventional supply chain as well as their community trade program, so that you can take those skills and transfer them to the sustainable fair trade supply chains, so we can learn the tricks of the trade and use them for a better world. So firstly, I would just say, please do it. We want you, we need you, and I think we're going to get some tips as to things you can do immediately. So yes, please, I think use your skills and come and join us.
That's again, I totally agree with Christine, and my thing is just live your life with as much authenticity and integrity as you can, you know. So start patterns now where you're buying things that are ethical. If you have to go without having the most exciting clothes or something like that, you know, I think it's worth it in the long run for the overall what you're going to be achieving for the planet, you know, in the long run. And the other principle is the loaf method. I don't know if you've come across that, but it stands for local, organic, animal friendly, and fair trade. And those are the four kind of key things that if you work around those when you're making decisions, it's a really good guideline. And that, and yeah, it's tough. I know what it's like being on a very small income. It's really tough to buy things. There was a comment in the chat, you know, how do students do that? Well, one thing might be to decide to join together with other students and buy, you know, because like you might not want a whole big bag of rice or something like that in one go, you know. Well, join together with some other students and share it out, share the costs and things like that. Try and cook with other people rather than everybody cooking a single meal. Just try and be more efficient in the way you use it, and then you can afford to pay for slightly more expensive stuff. But it's one of the biggest problems I have when I'm trying to sell stuff on my stalls is this attitude that everything that's fair trade has to be a lot more expensive than other things in the shops. And it's not always true. And I used to say to some of the elderly ladies who really were on a very tight budget, if you just bought something worth £1 every week, then that would make a massive difference to the amount that I could order and the difference that it's doing for the producers that are making it at the other end. You know, and so a lot of it is about just changing your outlook and just thinking of creative ways around making sure that those things, you know, work, I guess.
Thank you so much for these answers. We will now move on to the Q&A session. So if you could please write your questions that you may have in the chat. There's already one from Elisa, which I will now read. So how can we expand the range of fair trade products so that they are more available in our supermarket?
I'll step in with this on because I know quite a lot from Traidcraft and what's been going on behind the scenes, that Traidcraft have tried to be in the supermarkets for absolutely years, and they've actually started to withdraw a certain amount because the supermarkets just squeeze and squeeze and squeeze the profit margin so that it's just not viable going through a third party, as it were. And so they have taken a bit of decision to pull back a bit, but I think that's sad because the more stuff that's out there in the general public, the more people see it, the more people are buying it. And it shouldn't be a middle class thing where you have to go to a health food shop or a posh shop to be able to get the fair trade stuff. It should be accessible for people on the lowest budgets. But like the GeoBar, that was a really excellent project they did, they had to pull that because they were squeezed so much on the price they couldn't do it. So that's about campaigning and customers who are using supermarkets saying you've not got enough fair trade stuff. Co-op are doing really well. They've got a lot of products, and Waitrose are pretty good. I don't know about any of the others at the moment, but just, you know, send them letters, tell them, you know, what's good, say you appreciate it, and buy stuff on a regular basis so that they realise that the fair trade market is up, you know, and growing and increasing.
Thank you. So we have a question from Francesco. Would legal and administrative requirements imposed by the applicable regulations become an additional burden for fair trade? If yes, how could this be overcome?
Yeah, that's an absolutely huge question, and it's really, really true that obviously with Brexit we're all looking at our borders again, and actually right now we're having huge problems with, I mean, the ports are in mayhem at the moment, but there are increasingly non-tariff barriers being introduced to the international trade. So whether it's the legislation around, for example, honey or food, HACCP, the food standards, or standards, they are increasingly difficult for a relatively small producer to overcome. And that's actually one of the areas where the enterprises, the fair trade enterprises, organisations like Traidcraft will have a big technical team who enable that product to reach the stores in a way that would not be possible any other way. They're helping with the quality standards, the packaging requirements, the labelling requirements, the customs process, and all the regulatory requirements of food products. So those enterprises very often very active in that process and making that happen. And there are increasingly non-tariff barriers, which are making barriers to the free flow of products around the world. But on not the same subject, but something we haven't mentioned, so I'm going to get in there, which is not only that, fair trade is not just about, it also has a principle about changing the way we operate, and advocating for fairer trade rules and making sure that we live in a fairer and more just world. So Traidcraft Exchange has an incredible department which has been looking at the legislation supporting small shopkeepers. Fashion Revolution is going to be engaging with a huge campaign to ensure that the entire world is paying a living wage to garment producers for every garment which is bought and sold in the EU. So these are ways in which advocacy in changing the legislation is making a big difference, so that we have to have an approach from three sides. We have to have the approach from policy change, industry change, consumer change.
Great, thank you. Antonella is asking, Christine, you mentioned you work at the body shop. What are the main ways that the company goes about ensuring their supply chains are meeting international ethical standards?
Great question. Great question. I'm not actually, I left the body shop several years ago, so I'm not as sort of up to date as possibly I can be from the inside here. But it is, it's something that we need to improve all the way through. Corporate social responsibility, as we all know from the E.ON case, you know, you can have a fantastic reporting, and actually the practice can be completely different. But reporting is a first step. Transparency and reporting is a first step, so that people can then take people to count. So that if, for example, someone's reporting, then they should also not be reporting just their first tier, that factory that they buy from, but they should also be reporting on the factories, the subcontracting factories and their raw material producers as well. We need more reporting on that. And at the moment, there isn't enough transparency, and we need increased transparency. And not only that, but in all global supply chains, not just in those coming into the UK and Europe, but all of the products which are moving around the world. I mean, cotton is incredibly mobile commodity. It could be grown in West Africa, woven in India, printed in China, sewn up in Tunisia, and bought in the UK. We need to have more transparency. We need to have improved, and that is about us as consumers going to the people and demanding change. Yes, I mean, Anita Roddick, who founded the Body Shop, she said, when you go shopping, demand more change. So I think that's a good thing to keep in your head.
Thank you. The next question is from Lily, who says that her understanding of fashion revolution is that it does not encourage boycotting as the best way to tackle environmental and social problems. Do they support other means to encourage other modes of campaign and action to demand structural change for large cooperations?
Yeah. I mean, now, just as I was saying there, there's definitely, we have to have, yeah, so Fashion Revolution operates, 1/3 of the pillars of change is policy change. We have to change legislation, we have to change policy in order to make the world a fairer place for people and planet. But that has to be supported by the people, the industry and consumers. So yeah, we definitely need clearer legislation around fashion, and it's how we pay for it as well. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Lily, I don't know if you can say if that's answered the question.
Let us know if that answered the question. Louise, would you like to add anything, or should we move on to the next question?
It's sort of an aside from my work as a textile artist. I'm currently doing a commission for someone with shirts from someone who died, and I've been logging and cataloguing the labels and where things come from. And out of about 60 pieces of fabric, only 2 of them seem to be made in the UK, and they come from all over the place. They have all sorts of different fibres in them. And it's just, I remember going to talk at Greenbelt once, and the person asking us to take off a garment and look at the label and see what countries they come from. And most people don't have a clue that where these are coming from and what the conditions that they're grown in and things like that. And so that's another thing where you can be aware of, just get to know where are companies making things, what are the conditions, and challenge them on it.
Thank you. Ishna is now asking, what has Fairtrade done to implement a circular economy?
And I think we've got an answer in the chat also from Matthew on that one too.
Maybe we could start by quickly explaining what a circular economy is for those who don't know.
Oh gosh.
Well, it's about trying to use everything up and deal with the waste and deal with the production in a holistic way, so that nothing is just thrown away and discarded, that it is used and reused at the lowest cost to the planet. And there is a circular fair trade, there's a Brighton circular, I've forgotten the title, but there's a circular group in Brighton that do very good talks about once a fortnight, which I've been going to, and I've learned so much interesting stuff. And it's all about how to think through how the circular economy works in your field and how you as an individual can engage with it. It's and it is a holistic thing that needs to be part of the whole equation of it, organic, environment, fair trade, business models. It is and that links into the donuts economics thing. The lady wrote that, yeah, because that's essentially what she's talking about, and it's about trying to keep things used and circulating and not to waste things, rather than constantly getting more out of the ground. We all know that we shouldn't be taking fossil fuel out of the ground, so how can we do things that are more that have a better end result for every product that we're using. Yes, Ellen MacArthur. She went to my school actually, but she's quite a lot younger than me. My brother always thinks that I'm like her. I've never met her, never seen her, so who knows?
So what steps has Fairtrade taken to try and implement this more into their supply chains, depending on who they collaborate with, which farmers and workers?
Traidcraft are very definitely trying to go organic and do vegan stuff as much as they can, and they've changed their packaging to make it a lot more so they're not using plastic tape, and they're using paper filling rather than plastic bags. They used to have these horrible bags that used to float around all over the place and things got broken in them, and I complained about them for years, and they have gone back to paper, which is it has its own problems because the weight of paper going to Traidcraft and being transported and being reformed and things like that is an issue. There's no really easy wins on environmental stuff. You just have to try and find the most sensible, least invasive route through it to make your decisions, and we have to compromise at times, but as long as we're looking forward and moving on and trying our best and constantly reframing the questions and the solutions, then that's the main thing.
Thank you. I think we will end the Q&A session there. I'll just quickly answer Sophie's question, which is it possible to volunteer with Fairtrade in Brighton? If so, how? So I'd like to mention that there are various opportunities to get involved with the group, but this really depends on how you want to contribute and your skills and interests. So if you contact us on Facebook or Instagram, I will get in touch with you and we can definitely have a discussion about that. I would also like to mention that Christine has talked about it earlier in the talk, but the Fairtrade group is having a free event Saturday 6, so this Saturday. It is an online bake-off where there will be many activities and special speakers, including Peter Kyle, the Member of Parliament for Hove, and the Mayor of Brighton, Alan Robbins. So you can find all of this information in the chat. And now I will let Luthia speak in her role as President of the Development Society, as she has a small announcement.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, hi, I'm Lucia. I'm currently on my final year studying International Relations and Development, and I'm the president of the International Development Society at Sussex. First and foremost, I would like to say thank you for our hosts and for the event. It was really interesting and entertaining. And I would just like to add that DevSoc is currently looking for new committee members. So if you would be interested in joining us, you could help us with events, more social events, fundraising, social media, whatever. Just you can contact us through Facebook, Instagram, or email. I will be happy to have you in our community.
Thank you, Lucia. So the event is coming to an end. This has been a really inspiring discussion, which I'm sure will be a source of further reflection for all of us. I would like to give a big thank you to our speakers, Christine and Louise, as well as the Fairtrade Brighton and Hove Group and the Sussex Development Society Committee. And of course, a huge thank you to the audience. This event will not have happened without your support and engagement. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.